all on the war and Putin. I get that we've seen sharp spike in energy and food prices since then, but we're seeing rising prices everywhere, and particularly in housing with rents and shelter in places like apparel that have been rising for the last few months. That's much broader than just what we've seen as a result of the war.
Well, the very large increase in March was driven by a very large increase in energy prices and gas prices.
The increase in prices obviously long predates the war. We've been seeing inflation rise for most of the past year. In fact, for the last 6 months, inflation has been above the Fed's average target of 2%. So this is not just about the war. This is about persistent supply chain problems, and it's about the fact that demand is really, really strong, in part because of policy choices that we've made.
We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics. I remember going over convincing our team, or others too, convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
Canceled the Keystone pipeline on day one. He banned oil production on federal land. He reversed Trump's Alaska drilling. You know, I mean, I remember the time when it was a national goal to be energy independent.
The State Department will rule soon on whether to green-light the proposed 1,700-mile pipeline, the second engineered by the TransCanada Corporation and designed to pump 830,000 barrels of crude oil a day from Alberta to the Gulf Coast.
Your approval of the Keystone XL pipeline will almost immediately create 20,000 new American jobs here in the United States.
A decision on the $7 billion project was expected by the end of the year, but may be postponed pending review from the president.
Well, yeah, I guess the question is, why the delay? Why did the president put it off until after the election, which smells of politics? And, frankly, that's what really upsets the people of America.
Today, President Obama rejected the plan, but the battle involving jobs, the economy, and election year politics is far from over. The company, TransCanada, said it will reapply to build the pipeline.
Let me ask you about the oil in Canada. They have a lot of it, and at least one Republican candidate argued today it'll go someplace else if it doesn't go south and through the U.S. down into Mexico. Is that the case?
There are talks about it going to China.
Breaking news. We've been waiting for more than a year for the Obama administration to make a decision on a key pipeline that's supposed to carry oil from Canada through the United States. Lots and lots of jobs at stake, but there seems to be movement towards a final decision. Dan Lothian is here getting some new information. What's the latest?
That's right, Wolf. And as you know, the State Department had been reviewing to find out whether or not this pipeline would have any kind of environmental impacts.
Today's report says it won't have an effect on the environment either way. Approval or denial of one crude oil project remains unlikely to significantly impact demand for heavy crude oil.
Well, Brooke, I think that this study basically puts this project in the pipeline to approval. Basically, what this report outlines is the environmental impact that the Keystone Pipeline would have And according to this report, and we've been going through it for the last several minutes, it essentially concludes that it would not have a significant impact on greenhouse gas emissions, would not have a significant impact on climate change. And that
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill with the latest. Good evening, Mike.
Well, Brett, good evening. After years of environmental study and review, the Senate is now voting to potentially authorize the Keystone XL pipeline. To pass it and send it to President Obama, supporters need 60 votes.
This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. President Obama has vetoed a bill from Congress to authorize construction of the Keystone XL pipeline. The company behind the Keystone XL pipeline is challenging President Obama's rejection of that project. TransCanada is going to court, claiming the decision was arbitrary and unjustified.
The Trump administration just approving the Keystone XL pipeline project, authorizing construction to start. Now, the move reverses the Obama administration's decision to block the controversial oil pipeline. It seals a deal on one of Donald Trump's campaign promises. The project will funnel crude oil from Canada to refineries on the Gulf Coast.
I approved, immediately after we took office, the Keystone XL and Dakota Access Pipeline. Huh? 48,000 jobs.
Yeah, numbers don't lie. The fact checkers go into overdrive. They don't know what to do when they see the Dow Jones and NASDAQ averages continue to climb up. We're smashing records on unemployment, on workforce development, on deregulation. We're now net exporters of natural gas and oil in this country.
When you look at 2019, for the first time in 70 years, we're a net exporter of oil. That's just absolutely incredible. We are the largest natural gas producer in the world. A decade ago, we were third in both of those rankings. A decade ago, you were just talking about the price of oil. Oil was hitting around $140 a barrel, and now we're talking about a high of 61. So when you have domestic, abundant energy that you can produce on large quantities, that produces a reliable power source for the economy, manufacturing costs come down, agriculture costs come down, the cost of living comes down.
And when gas gets cheap, Americans get happy. I mean, exactly. It's pretty simple, and yet you have Joe Biden saying that on day one it would be his mission to get rid of all of these jobs.
Yeah, Joe Biden,
all of these jobs.
He has said that there is no place for fossil fuels in my administration. That's a direct quote.
The stroke of a pen, President Joe Biden revoked a key permit for the Keystone pipeline extension, halting construction and putting plans for a pipeline that would eventually connect Alberta, Canada to Texas on hold.
President Biden says it's long past time for America to move forcefully toward renewable energy.
We see it with our own eyes, we feel it, we know it in our bones, and it's time to act.
But change comes at a fragile time for the economy. The fossil fuel industry supports more than 12 million jobs, supplies 80% of America's energy, and about 8% of our GDP.
This has more to do with the immediate cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline, banning drilling on federal property, and just the sort of war against fossil fuels. This is what you get. You get higher oil prices and higher gas prices.
Isn't it true that pipelines are more carbon delivery efficient than trains or trucks or other forms of delivery? If you could answer just that limited question.
Yeah, that is true. I think that is true.
This is material that, since we had the executive order to stop our Keystone XL pipeline, this is material that is now just sitting. Call it a stranded asset. We got a control building that goes to a substation. There's $110,000 sitting there. We've got 2 transformers for the substations. They're about $750,000 a piece. There's $1.5 million in transformers. We've got some breakers sitting over there, 3 of them. They're about $55,000 a piece, so there's another $165,000. And that's just this one spot.
But when President Biden's executive order came in, things shut down almost immediately. We started seeing workers leave town, leave the state, and just like that, it ground to a halt. Yeah, and we're talking years of work with just the man hours, the engineering, the land accrual, getting the easements. And there's a lot of work put in, and this is just in our little area. You know, this is the projects from Canada all the way down to Oklahoma. So
imagine every small town like ours is feeling the same thing.
Look at all the pipeline that's done already. There's much of it. I mean, what's left, a little bit in South Dakota, a little bit in Montana, and she's hooked up. But the jobs, the ongoing jobs, the weekly jobs, the day-to-day jobs for these pump stations alone, you're taking away from us. You're taking food out of the mouths of our children, our grandchildren. You're taking good, high-paying jobs away from the entire, where this pipeline passes through, which is what, 11 states? You're stealing from us.
Well, before I really got any of the news, I had the pipeline workers come back in and said, okay, it's it, we're done, it's finished. And I said, he signed it, meaning he signed the executive order. And they were like, apparently, they told us to get our tools and remove ourselves from the property instantaneously, within just hours of President Biden taking over. It was just like a complete, total shock. Almost as if it were a death in the family, because it was just like, for 3 days I didn't know what to do, where to go. It was just, what are we gonna do? They all left, you know, it was just, yeah, now what do we do?
When you see big, strong men who have worked physical, hard labor come in with their heads hanging, saying, I'm sorry, but I have to cancel my contract, I gotta go. And when you see families and kids with tears, every job matters, not just one, not just 11,000. A family's been impacted negatively, and we don't know why, you know? Like I said, there was no breach in contract. There was no broken, you know, rules. It was just that President Biden signed an executive order that said no more.
We've got a Fox Business alert. President Biden taking questions from reporters on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline running through Germany. The president said he allowed it to continue because it is nearly finished. The administration received bipartisan backlash for waiving sanctions on the Russian company building the pipeline after canceling the Keystone XL here at home.
The Keystone XL pipeline is coming to an end. The Canadian company TC Energy is terminating the $9 billion project, saying it ran out of options after President Biden revoked a key permit. The line would have carried crude oil from Canada to Nebraska.
This is really bad policy, and when we're not producing energy here in America, we're transferring wealth to nations that do not share our interests, that do not like America.
Is today you had the White House releasing the statement through the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, begging OPEC to pump more oil for gas prices when Joe Biden, the first day in office, killed Keystone Pipeline and then eliminated leasing for oil and gas leases on federal lands. People warned about that.
This as gas prices jumped. For most of the weekend, the national average was at $3.18 a gallon, about 4 cents higher than a week ago and a full $1 higher than a year ago.
News by the numbers, gas prices across the country are seeing a rise. According to AAA Mid-Atlantic, the national average price for a gallon of regular gasoline was $3.19, which is up 2 cents from last week. But the agency says this time last year, drivers were paying $2.18 a gallon on average.
The White House has asked oil and gas companies to lower fuel costs. So, Lauren, the president, who is a climate warrior, hates fossil fuels, now wants to increase the production of fossil fuels to get the price down. This makes no sense.
What would that conversation even sound like?
Yeah.
When you kill the Keystone XL pipeline, when you ban drilling on federal land and waters, what does that conversation look like when you call up your energy producers and you say, "Oh, can you turn back on the pumps and drill that well?" It's so awkward. And the president was asked about this yesterday by a Bloomberg reporter. Turned his back.
I don't see anything that's going to happen in the meantime that's going to significantly reduce gas prices. So but I must tell you, I don't have a near-term answer.
Oil prices jumping once again. Yesterday up about 1.1%, hitting the highest price since October 2014. This is Exxon's board of directors is debating dropping oil and gas projects.
Also right now, gas prices have increased every day for the past 27 days, and the current national average is at $3.38 a gallon, according to AAA. They said it's due to higher demand, a decline in supply, and elevated crude prices.
If you take a look at, gas prices, and you take a look at oil prices, that is a consequence of, thus far, the refusal of Russia or the OPEC nations to pump more oil. And we'll see what happens on that score sooner than later.
President Biden strikes down the Keystone XL pipeline, ending a 12-year saga of a controversial oil pipeline. Does this kill the economy, or does this save the environment? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Oil. America loves it. U.S. dependence on foreign oil is a big reason for many of America's foreign wars. Oil-producing countries even have a lot of sway over U.S. presidents. But I'm happy to say, newly elected President Biden has broken from the mold and is striking a blow to America's greatest oil-producing enemy, Canada. Biden has canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, a proposed oil pipeline that would send Canadian oil to the U.S. This was actually one of Biden's day one promises as president, and he kept his promise. Whoa, Joe, you got a lot to learn about being president. Canada is the world's fourth largest oil exporter. Almost all of that exported oil goes to the United States. Even with the huge growth of America's own oil industry, half of the country's oil still comes from Canada. So Trudeau was not happy about Biden's decision to axe the pipeline. In fact, in his first call with Biden, Trudeau said he was disappointed. Given Trudeau's persona, you might be surprised that he's a major defender of the Keystone XL oil pipeline, that this was an issue he and Trump agreed on. In 2017, Trudeau said no country would find 173 billion barrels of oil in the ground and just leave them there. The resource will be developed. Our job is to ensure that it is done responsibly, safely, and sustainably. So what is the Keystone XL pipeline? And why is it so controversial? I'll tell you the full story right after the break. Welcome back. Canada has a lot of oil, and it wants to sell it to the United States. The Keystone XL pipeline controversy has been brewing for 12 years. It's an estimated $8 billion project from Canada's TC Energy, formerly known as TransCanada. TC Energy already has pipelines in the U.S., the Keystone Pipeline and the Keystone Gulf Coast Pipeline. Those pipelines carry Canadian crude oil to big U.S. oil refineries. The Keystone XL pipeline was going to be a 1,200-mile-long expansion to the existing pipelines. The expansion was originally conceived when oil prices were at historic highs, just before the 2008 financial crisis and American shale oil boom. Canada has very stringent environmental regulations, but the pipeline expansion managed to jump through all those hurdles, and in 2010, Canadian regulators approved it. The problem was the U.S. The pipeline was controversial in the U.S. for several reasons. First, whether you're talking about farmers, ranchers, or Native Americans, no one wanted an oil pipeline built in their backyard. And then there were environmental concerns. The existing Keystone pipeline has leaked several times, including a major spill in 2019 and in 2017. Understandably, people don't want their farmland looking like this. But even if safety standards can be improved for the proposed Keystone XL pipeline, some environmentalists don't care. They view oil production as inherently evil, something that destroys the environment and contributes to climate change, which will kill us all. So rather than invest in more greenhouse gas spewing oil production, why not invest more in green, renewable energy? By 2012, President Obama still hadn't made a decision on the Keystone XL pipeline, so he used the upcoming election to delay the decision even further. He rejected the permit, saying a congressionally imposed deadline didn't allow enough time to review the project's environmental impact before the election. But he suggested TC Canada could reapply later. After being re-elected, Obama's State Department began the environmental review. In 2014, the review concluded the pipeline would not significantly contribute to carbon pollution. But in 2015, Obama rejected it anyway, citing climate change concerns despite the State Department's report. Then came Trump. One of his campaign promises was to approve the Keystone XL pipeline. And a few months into Trump's presidency, the State Department granted a permit for the pipeline. But in 2018, a U.S. district judge blocked the construction until even more environmental studies could be completed, because he said the State Department's studies fell short. Trump called that a political decision, and in March 2019, he just signed the permit himself. That bypassed the judge's order to block the construction because it only applied to the State Department. There are a variety of reasons why both Trump and Trudeau wanted the Keystone XL pipeline. Now that's a buddy cop movie I'd pay to see. Donald Trump and Justin Trudeau in Double Trouble. You know you'd watch it. Anyway, back to the oil pipelines. Canada has been grappling for years with congestion on pipelines. That caused a glut of oil in storage tanks in Alberta, driving prices down and spurring the province to impose production curtailments to drain record inventories. The new Keystone XL pipeline is designed to ease that glut, while providing Americans with cheap oil that doesn't come from foreign oil wars. There's also the economic advantage. The pipeline construction would create high-paying, blue-collar union jobs and support indigenous tribes. TC Energy reached a deal with 4 labor unions in August 2020 to build the line. In November, it reached an agreement with 5 indigenous tribes that says the tribes will take a roughly $785 million ownership stake. And a new deal, led by North America's building trades unions, gives priority to union workers for the project. Over the past several months, 124 miles of the pipeline have been built. But then Biden took office, and the project is now dead. And that has long-lasting consequences. I'll tell you what they are after this break. Welcome back. So President Biden has killed the Keystone XL pipeline. What are the consequences, besides potentially yielding 48,000 tons of scrap metal? Well, it depends on whether Americans are really ready to give up their gasoline-fueled cars. I'm going to go with not yet. And as long as America still needs oil, then America might want to at least get that oil from a more environmentally friendly source. Now, Canada's tar sands are not the world's most environmentally friendly source of oil per se, but innovation and technological improvements have substantially reduced the greenhouse gas emissions associated with Canadian tar sands productions by 30% since the 1990s, as the Canadian government calculates. And in a last-minute attempt to stop Biden, TC Energy pledged the project would produce net zero carbon emissions. To power the partially completed pipeline, they vowed to spend $1.7 billion on solar, wind, and battery power, And they also pledged to hire a union workforce and eliminate all greenhouse gas emissions from operations by 2030. But it didn't matter. That's a bad message to send to energy companies. It doesn't matter what you do to minimize greenhouse gas emissions because no innovation, no compromise is ever enough. Of course, there are major environmental challenges with so-called green energy as well, like how the solar panel market is dominated by China. And when the U.S. is reliant on a hostile authoritarian regime for its energy needs, that can lead to problems, like how the U.S. spends huge resources in the Middle East to protect oil interests. Speaking of hostile authoritarian regimes, by canceling the Keystone XL pipeline with Canada, it could mean Canadian oil is replaced by Russian and Venezuelan oil. I don't know about you, but I'd rather get my oil from this guy than this guy. But what about union jobs? PolitiFact says the claim that by revoking the Keystone XL pipeline permit, Biden is destroying 11,000 jobs is only half true. What's half true? Well, PolitiFact points to a statement by TC Energy that says the pipeline construction was expected to employ more than 11,000 Americans, creating $1.6 billion in gross wages. So, what's half true? PolitiFact says, well, those are just estimated jobs, and most of the estimated jobs were temporary. What? You mean when you complete a construction project, the job is over? But here's the biggest problem with the Keystone XL pipeline. It's part of an ongoing partisan war between the right and the left that isn't based on economics or the environment, but on eternally struggling against the other side. The Keystone XL pipeline became a symbol too often used as a campaign cudgel by both parties, rather than a serious policy matter. And all of this obscured the fact that this pipeline would neither be a silver bullet for the economy, as was promised by some, nor the express lane to climate disaster proclaimed by others. You know who said that? President Obama. As it is now, it is impossible for American businesses to make big, long-term investments in a political environment in which every project is up for renegotiation or summary economic execution every time the White House changes hands. It shouldn't be possible for one man serving a short term in a temporary elected office to undo years of work and billions of dollars in investment. Unless, of course, the president you voted for is in power. Then he should be allowed to do whatever he wants. But at the end of the day, President Biden's cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline may not have much of an impact on the economy or the environment. Because even without it, the U.S. is set for record Canadian oil imports in the coming years. And no, we won't need to rely on sending the oil on the backs of Canadian moose, or even Canadian geese. It turns out that a whole bunch of smaller oil pipelines that get way less media attention are in the process of being expanded. And those will provide more than enough capacity to send lots of Canadian oil to the U.S. As one expert puts it, if you add them all up, you can make the argument that the Keystone XL pipeline was not needed. Oh, good. So this whole debate that's lasted for 12 years through 3 presidential administrations doesn't really make any difference. So what do you think of the Keystone XL pipeline and Biden's decision to stop it? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.